In this video, I'm going to describe the code review process that we're going to use in GitHub. We'll start with an overview and then we'll jump in and I'll show a hands-on example. So first of all, why code review? Well, code review is really a good learning experience for both parties. As Bill Nye says, everybody I meet knows something I don't. Or as our colleague Tom Wolfe says, I'm convinced I can learn something new from everybody I meet. And that's really the idea of a code review, is in our ever-changing field, we're taking an opportunity to learn from each other. We're also enhancing quality as we go along because a good code review should minimize the technical debt that we have in our code base. When do we review? We'll typically review during a pull request. We're doing things a little bit differently in this class because we're going to do a code review essentially at the end of a milestone or 4-week unit of work, where typically the code review would happen within that unit of work. We're going to do ours at the end just because that's a good milestone where we know that projects will have code committed and everybody else can take a look. So in our case, we're reviewing another project, not our own project. And one other very important thing. Many times in a code review, you'll just add a bit of commentary. So here's a pull request on one of my projects, and you see we can go to review changes, we can add a comment, and then we can just comment, we can approve the pull request, or we can request changes to the pull request. So that's how a code review typically goes, is you're just saying, hey, here's my opinion on some things, and here's some things I think you can correct that will make it a higher quality code base. I'm going to do things a little bit differently in our example. What we're going to do is, instead of describing changes, I want you to actually make changes as a proposal and do so in your own branch. Because remember, a branch is like a sandbox, so you can do whatever you want in there. And instead of describing something that would make the program better, you can actually make the program better and demonstrate that through code. And then the group you're reviewing has an opportunity to merge that code. So you'll have a code review branch, and if we approve a merge, if the group decides that your code review is worth merging, it will get merged into master. So it's important to consider that anything that you put in that branch should be worthy of merging into master. It should be complete thoughts. It shouldn't be like here's a class I made for you, you can fill out the details. Think of definition of done there. One other thing that we want to do is make your changes in code, but don't put comments in the code that describes what your changes are doing. Instead, what you can do is you can make a pull request and then you can add comments inside of the pull request itself on GitHub. And that keeps the discussion in GitHub instead of cluttering up your code with discussion. So in other words, you see, this is a review from a prior semester. And the code reviewer here made a change and then described the change right here in GitHub, kind of like in the context of the source code, but not in the source code file itself. And then after that, I was able to add a bit of feedback as well. So you see, we're able to have a conversation here while keeping our code clean. What we don't want to do is have a conversation in the code in comments. For example, you should really make a constant out of this. That's a conversation. It's not describing the code. You're having a conversation with another developer, and that is adding clutter. The only thing that should follow the double slash is a comment, a true comment, more like the one I have down here on line 28, where I'm describing the code itself. One major caution, though, if you find yourself creating a lot of comments inside of code, ask yourself if your code just is not readable enough. Ideally, code should be readable, and thus you shouldn't really need a whole lot of inline comments. And by readable, I mean things like, do the variable names make sense? Is it year started or is it A2? Which one makes more sense and which one is more readable? If it were A2, you'd have to say, oh, this was the year that Plain Places was started. But if the variable is year started, then that's obvious because the variable name is describing what it is. So a couple of steps that we need. Number one, if you go out to the code review assignment, you'll see a roster of all of the groups and the group members. I created this from the design document that you submitted to me earlier this semester. So first thing is make sure that your group is there and that I have the right GitHub URL for your group and also the right members. Then take a look at the code review assignments, and you should see your name assigned to a group that is not your own. So make sure you've been assigned to a group, and make sure it's a group that's not your own. Take a look at the code review assignment and look at the code reviewers who are assigned to review your group. And what you'll need to do is add them as collaborators to your group in GitHub, and also add me as a collaborator. So for example, I'll go to one of my GitHub projects and I'll go to Settings, and then under Settings, Manage Access, put in my super secret, super secure password. Manage Access, we can choose Invite a Collaborator, and then you can search and it will auto-complete based on what you're typing in. So it might be necessary to message the people who are assigned to code review you, or if you're a code reviewer, message the DevOps person from the group you're reviewing and say, I'd like to be added as a collaborator. And also please add me. My GitHub name is DiscoSpiff, one word. Add me, that way I'll be able to add that commentary back and forth on the pull request. Now for the review, we'll step through these steps in just a moment, but we want to copy the clone URI from the GitHub repo. In Visual Studio, choose File and then Clone Repository. If Visual Studio is not your IDE of choice, most IDEs will have a very similar sequence to clone a repository from GitHub. As a matter of fact, in Visual Studio, you can also choose File, Open, and then Open from GitHub. Step number 1, make sure that the project compiles. If it doesn't compile, reach out to the group and ask them how to make it compile. Reason I say this is, remember, you're going to be committing changes to version control, and you should only commit changes that do compile. I've seen code reviews come in before where the student says, well, I never was able to make this project compile, so I just made a few changes and committed and pushed it. Well, if it doesn't compile, you shouldn't commit and push. So make sure you can get it to compile first. Next, very important, create a new branch and name it with your Bearcat ID, which is your 6+2, and then underscore, and then code review and the code review number. So code review 1, code review 2, so on and so forth. Next, take a look at some best practices for the programming language that you're evaluating. A quick search reveals several great resources for code review. Object-oriented best practices. There's quite a bit here that can apply to multiple languages, not just C#. Razor page best practices. Many good ideas here and several different links that appear. And then perhaps one of the best of all, C# best practices takes you right here to the C# coding conventions and C# programming guide on Microsoft's webpage. And that tells you naming conventions, layout conventions, common language guidelines, so on and so forth. A whole lot of really good information. This is especially helpful if you're trying to code review someone else's project and just nothing seems apparent to you. You're looking at it and you don't know of any good suggestions. Have a look at the documentation here and see what you could implement in that project. You'll learn something and you'll provide value to the group that you're reviewing as well. We don't have a formal textbook for this course because textbooks tend to be a little bit out of date, where a lot of things we're researching tend to be things that are very much emerging and very much project specific. So the learnings that we're going to do is by finding our own information, by looking at things like best practices and looking at how to apply them in a real world scenario, which is what we're doing here. So review those best practices, study them, and then change the project where it doesn't align with best practices. One other good best practice to look at is the SonarQube 7 Deadly Sins. Remember that our goal is to decrease technical debt, and this is a good description of what technical debt is, and each of these gets into a bit more detail. So, bugs and potential bugs, coding standards breach, duplications, lack of unit tests, bad distribution of complexity, spaghetti design, and not enough or too many comments. You should look for 3 distinct changes that you can make to reduce the technical debt in the program. So in other words, if you maybe add a try-catch block and you do something in the catch like you're logging an exception, which is a good idea, that counts as one distinct change. If you do that in 3 different places, that still counts as one distinct change. If you change a variable name to align with best practices, that would be a second distinct change. So make 3 distinct changes and then commit and push your changes. But make absolutely certain you're on your code review branch, not on master. If you're on master, you could cause a lot of extra work for yourself and for the group that you're reviewing, and it won't result in a good grade. Commit and push, then go into GitHub and create a pull request. Don't merge it, just create the pull request, because that's where we can go in and we can add some discussion. As I showed you, we can add the discussion in line. So add the discussion and then submit the code review URL to Canvas. That's all you have to submit in this project is the code review URL. I'll take a look at everything else right there in the code review itself. A few things to avoid. One thing I mentioned is don't put rationale or discussion in source code comments or justification. Only true source code comments belong in source code. Anything else is clutter. So save the discussion for the pull request where we can have a back and forth discussion. Next, remember that your branch is going to be a candidate to merge into master. So it should compile because we can only merge things that compile. And on that same note, avoid the temptation to make an incomplete feature because that's something that's not complete, and only complete features that meet the definition of done should be merged to master. Sometimes in a code review, I'll see someone say, well, it looks like you're going to need this DAO, so I created an empty class for you. Well, if it's empty, then it's functionality that's not complete, and then that is technical debt, and that doesn't belong in master. So a couple things to avoid. Now, let's work through a demo ourselves. I'll walk through each of these steps now using a sample Visual Studio project. First, copy the clone URI. I go to the project I'm reviewing, I choose code, and then I choose the little copy icon right here by the URL. Second, go to Visual Studio, choose File, and then Clone Repository. Visual Studio, File, Clone Repository, and I simply paste that URL and it gives me a local path, and then I choose Clone. It appears the clone was successful, but in my case it did not open. It's no problem. I can go ahead and open it myself just by going to File, Open. And then I will choose that project that I just created. Step number 1, before you do anything, very important. Go down here where you see Master and click New Branch. Make sure you do this right away. Now give it your Bearcat ID, which is your 6+2, and then just code review. And check out branch and create branch. What this is doing is it's taking a snapshot of master at this point in time and then giving you your own sandbox. Now, before you make any changes, double, triple, quadruple check that you have your own code review branch here and not master. If you push to master, then you're pushing to the group's gold repository and you're pushing changes that they don't know about. So that's why we want to use feature branches. I come to, and I look at this code that I have now. I just looked at an example. I went to index.cshtml in this specific project. This is a project I created a while back. And I just wanted to find something that I could do to reduce technical debt. This one stuck out at me. I don't like this variable name, and I'll confess that I named it. But JSON string, I've done two things that are kind of iffy here. First of all, I have the data type embedded in the variable name string. Secondly, I have the data format embedded in the variable name, that being JSON. What I haven't done is I have not described what data I have in the variable, which is really the most important. And if I look at this, I see that it's actually specimens near a location. So I will refactor this, rename, and you see that it gives me a nice little wizard to do this. And what's nice is it not only changes where I've declared the variable, but in all of the usages of the variable. And if I wish, I can even update comments and strings and other things. So go ahead and choose Apply, and then we'll save. Right-click, Git, and commit. And I'll just say something like, my code review suggestions. And I'll go ahead and choose commit. I want to show you a before and after of our online repository. You notice that we have 23 commits and one branch, and the branch is simply called master. Now let's return to Visual Studio. Choose the Home option and choose Sync. If we take a look at this, we see that in the branch Jones BR code review, we have an outgoing commit that's ready to be pushed. Now I'll emphasize again, make sure up here you see Jones BR code review, down here you see Jones BR code review, or whatever your code review branch is. But nonetheless, make sure that you see that because you don't want to be pushing to master. I'm going to go ahead and hit push on this. And we see our confirmation. Now I return to GitHub and take a look at a few things. Jones BR code review had recent pushes less than a minute ago. That appeared automatically. So I can click compare and do pull request. Now this is where I can create my pull request, which is a code review I'd like you to do. And here's where the important part is. Down here you can leave a little write-up. You can describe what you learned from the project, 3 things that you learned from the project. You can describe how the project works. You can say, was it available on time? Did it compile? Did you have any issues when you were getting it up and running? Look for all those criteria in the code review assignment. Next, go to Files Changed, and instead of adding inline comments to justify and describe your changes, you see what you can do here is you can simply click the plus, and then you can justify the changes right here. So I'd like you to do this for your changes. Describe your rationale and cite sources to back up your rationale. So here I'll say, give this a more meaningful name. More descriptive name means less need for inline comments. Something like that, and I'll choose add single comment. The advantage of doing it here is that you can add your contributions here, and then the other group members can talk back and forth with you, and you have the advantage of having it in the context of the code that you're discussing, while at the same time you're not polluting that code with commentary in the source code itself. So do that over in the Files Changed view. Then in the Conversation view, add any other overall conversation. As I said, look at the assignment for the details there. And as a code reviewer, once you've done that, you are now complete. So what I'll need from you is simply take this URL specific to your pull request. Make sure it is your pull request and submit that to me on Canvas, and that's what I'll grade. I will also add some commentary in here in the source code in the Files Change section, and I'll add a merge recommendation in the pull request section. So you will benefit from getting some feedback from me. The group will benefit by getting feedback from you and me. And then the group might also have a meaningful branch that it can merge that will reduce technical debt. And this kind of comes full circle on something we talked about earlier, which was the importance of GitHub branches and Git branches. Now you see how we can use that to kind of have a side conversation and do some experiments without impacting master directly. Here's a guideline for the grades, and this isn't absolute. There could be things that fall in and out of these different grades, but for a D or an F, didn't properly use the Git framework or pushed changes to master branch. For a C, something that could have been automatically implemented by the IDE. For example, we have these using statements at the top of any class, and that is importing any other classes that we're going to need to use as part of our logic in this class. Sometimes people will go through and manually update these, but the reality is in Visual Studio, Control-R, Control-G will do that for you automatically. Another common one, let's say we had our tabs off a little bit. You see how the dotted lines kind of give us an idea where our tabs should be. So you might go through and want to manually re-tab that, but Control-K, Control-D will do the same thing for you. Now the trick is that you see the IDE can do this for you, so there's no need to make a separate pull request for this. And so that's why it really doesn't carry a whole lot of weight in a code review. What I'd rather see are some things that are cited as best practices. So anyway, I'll let you go ahead and read over these yourself as they do get a bit detailed, but I'll give a quick summary. So incomplete features, like an empty class. No sources cited or discussion in comments, that's a C-ish grade. B, minor impact, okay, yeah, you need that, but that's not a really big achievement on technical debt. Also no source citation. So what's an A? A good write-up in the pull request. The suggestions significantly decrease technical debt. Suggestions are complete, can be merged to master. The code reviewer discusses the rationale for the suggestions in the pull request, and the reviewer uses a best practice documentation and cites those best practices in the review. So that's a look at our code review. This is always a fun time because it's an opportunity to express ourselves and learn. I'm looking forward to seeing the reviews. Thank you.